Hello, ladies, gents, everyone else. Welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I'm Connor. That's Phil.
A humbug.
I'm so glad I left a slightly more than what felt like appropriate pause. I'm learning, Phil. I'm learning your unique rhythm. And
yeah, it's that I've still got I'm still like cautiously on the mute button because now I am the one recovering from a cold and trying to stop myself from bursting into hacking coughs.
Yeah, viruses travel slower through a Skype or Discord connection, but it's good to know that I am still capable of ruining your holidays and getting you sick.
Hey.
Well, we have a very interesting episode, I think, of Heavy Hands ahead of us this week. Obviously, no UFC card behind us, no UFC card ahead of us until mid-January, and it's not quite time for the handies yet. So we thought we would have on a guest that we've had, I think, more than once on the show, but not in some time, contributor of the Fight Site, recently retired professional MMA fighter, extremely fun follow on Twitter, and Matt Joya's father, Ben Kohn. Ben, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
That was quite an introduction.
Oh, well. So just at the top, I want to say that I just saw you tweeting about this, Ben, that he just released on the Fight Site YouTube, correct?
Yes, the Fight Site presents
a two-part episode interviewing Julie Kedzie on a topic, although I think different angles, but on the topic that we are going to touch on here. You talked about sort of training and coach fighter culture in MMA with Julie. Is that right? Yep,
it's definitely the second part of this episode. There will be a third part talking about WMA in general, from the advancement in training and all that. But this one's really much heavier topic. Fighter coach relationships is the focus and what it's centered around. So I really urge everyone to go and listen to that. Thank you, Julie, for being willing and able to talk about it. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, and extra relevant to you right now because, as you told me when we were setting up this episode, you are about to move into is it just a jiu-jitsu coaching role or a jiu-jitsu for MMA coaching role?
So I think I'm going to be given a lot of leeway, but I'm going to really try and because we do have like active fighters at the gym, so I would want to start with jiu-jitsu for MMA and grappling for MMA in general.
Yeah,
things that I've kind of learned and understood and picked up between the two. So that will be the focus at first, because I think one of my main training partners, Steve, he's got a title defense coming up. So I want to help him. I think he's going to be fighting again in February. So
cool.
Definitely want to get him ready.
So has your you had 2 pro fights, correct?
It was the 2 amateur fights. Sorry,
amateur fights.
Yeah.
So he's professional only in the sense that as long as it lasted, it was because sort of his wife was allowing him to do it.
Basically.
Yeah.
I was being humored.
So did that experience change at all your perception on like how you want to go about coaching grappling? Having the have you figured out, essentially is what I'm asking, that jiu-jitsu is fake?
So yeah. Yes and no, actually, to that second question. I'll explain that. But it definitely changed a lot about my grappling. The experience doing mixed martial arts, even it's not like I was in a gym, and I think it's actually better that I wasn't in some sort of big gym with a lot of high level fighters.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that I was in a smaller, more local gym that had just like some really good fighters, like, and people who were really like good coaches and just good training partners. And in a smaller environment, is that I kind of learned a lot about how MMA changes jiu-jitsu.
Mm-hmm.
In essence, a lot of it doesn't work. Like, guard play is really not too viable unless you are pretty much a freak. And it's more easily countered with a lot less skill.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, like, there are a lot of spots where MMA fighters make stupid fucking mistakes, and it's so easy to capitalize with good grappling.
Mm-hmm.
So it definitely changed. Like, I was able to take what I needed to from the MMA experience and see what like changes the game in jiu-jitsu for the better, or makes you better at jiu-jitsu. And also like it gives you that, a lot more urgency is like another thing. It really does. Like you can't be on your back because someone's going to hit you in the face.
Right. You
can't turtle up because you're going to get just a horrific knee to the kidney.
Right.
You got to move. So those two things really changed. And then when I went back to jiu-jitsu, it elevated my game completely. Doing MMA and then getting back to jiu-jitsu and tightening up the things that need to be tightened up for jiu-jitsu. What a combination.
Because it almost sounds like what it would emphasize is like rejuvenated focus on just fundamentally good grappling, right? Like, I don't know what's a good way to say this. Like, I should say, by the way, before we get too far off track, we're going to be talking about like the modern MMA grappling meta with Ben, which is why obviously Phil and I have no fucking idea what we're talking about when it comes to grappling. So that's why we need somebody like Ben here to explain to us that jiu-jitsu is in fact real and it can hurt us. But what just came to mind is like, I wonder if this comes from jiu-jitsu, and tell me if I'm wrong, if this is a misconception. MMA is a very trendy sport. Like, every few years, somebody has an idea, and then everyone starts imitating it. And this is not the only sport that's like this. You know, I've been playing chess. Chess is like this too. There are chess openings that are very trendy, and topical is what they say in the chess world. And everybody just starts playing them for no particular reason other than that everyone else is playing them now. That's not the case in like boxing, I don't think. Like, there probably is to an extent, but it's like it's so old and established, you kind of just have certain regions produce certain kinds of fighters, certain coaches produce certain
like
kinds
chess,
of fighters.
No,
well, I guess so. Yeah. I don't know how to explain that. But do you think it is a result of jiu-jitsu culture in any way that MMA has this like seasonal affectation where suddenly everybody's doing front kicks, suddenly everybody's doing calf kicks, suddenly everybody is doing certain submissions, or is that not even the case in jiu-jitsu?
I think it's less so in jiu-jitsu, but I think the element is there because if you actually think about it, the sport of jiu-jitsu really kind of did go parallel with the sport of MMA. They're both about the same age in terms of like the IBJJF and the growth of the sport and ADCC and everything like that. It's not that old. It's actually younger than MMA if you think about it.
Yeah.
So for me, you do kind of see that, like leg locks. Once leg locks came in fashion, like they started to really sweep through everywhere. Now everyone's doing leg locks to the point where IBJJF like changed their rules and allowed leg locks.
There was the berimbolo phase. Now it's buggy chokes. Every MMA fighter is trying to make buggy chokes work. Right.
It's already like I've already stopped seeing the jiu-jitsu clips for buggy chokes.
Yeah, they don't necessarily have to be that effective. It's like the Anderson Silva kick when everybody jumped on that train. I just wonder, it's a thing for whatever reason you don't see this in boxing or really in kickboxing or Muay Thai, but you see it in MMA and you seem to see it in jiu-jitsu as well.
It's possibly just the youth of like the sport compared to these other sports.
Yeah, my guess is that it is at least somewhat tied to internet literacy, because that's the two things that I mean, and I say literacy, with a very like a broad meaning of the term, but that's kind of what ties together your jiu-jitsu guys and your MMA guys and your chess guys and not your boxing guys.
It is a thing in chess,
for whatever
too.
reason, I think boxing remains a very like a genuinely grassroots transmitted, like you learn it in gyms kind of sport. It really is taught the way it was for the its entire history. It's very similar now.
Yeah,
but I think chess obviously it was incredibly friendly to the internet.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I think that drives a lot of sort of trends and a lot of worrying that people are going to fall behind. And I think it probably fits pretty well with the sort of cliquey gym systems and so on that pop up around around jiu-jitsu and MMA as well, because people are constantly wanting to say, I've got my magic sauce, come here, I can show you the best way to buggy choke people.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting point. That kind of makes sense to me, because MMA is itself a pretty internet friendly sport. Like it really grew up.
It is a child of the internet, really.
Yeah, like it grew up with the internet.
It didn't exist in any form other than VHS tapes and online at one point. So
interesting. Well, that sort of is adjacent to what I wanted to talk about today, is and a little less in the sort of fashion of the month kind of sense. I want to talk more about broad trends in MMA grappling, because I think everyone would agree we are in, certainly not the first, but a golden age of MMA grapplers. I think we just had Khabib's career end a few years ago, and he's quite possibly the greatest grappler we've ever seen in the sport. But now we have Islam Makhachev, we have Khamzat Chimaev, we have guys like it seems like every 3 months a new flyweight comes along who does the thing I've been talking about being part of the flyweight meta forever. We have Askar Askarov, and now we have Amir Albazi, who has a very similar grappling style. Bryce Mitchell is very modern. And what I mean by that is that the modern MMA grappler seems to be a top player first and foremost, a solid takedown artist. Wrestling is very well incorporated for all these fighters. They do not struggle to get opponents down. They never accept bottom position because they don't have to. And a growing, I think, like intense focus on rides and like pinning positions. Basically, it feels that grappling today is becoming more and more closely wedded to ground and pound, which is really like the most unique, the phase that is most unique to MMA. There's a lot of other combat sports that mix different arts and different areas of fighting, but MMA is almost the only one where you can take somebody down and then punch them in the face a bunch of times. And it really feels like the modern MMA grappler has gotten exceptionally good compared to their forebears at getting people down, keeping them down, and doing it in such a way that they can generate lots and lots of leverage to beat them up while they're stuck on their back or on their side or whatever position they may be trapped in. So, first of all, have you noticed a trend of this kind at all, or is this just my grappling neophyte eyes deceiving me?
No, I think it's definitely something to point out that grapplers are, a lot of the champions are grapplers, or grappling-based fighters. Aljo Oliveira most recently. I mean, Islam is a wrestler and grappler with phenomenal grappling.
Yeah.
Khabib, obviously.
How could I forget Aljo?
Can I offer a caveat to the trend?
Sure.
It's in the good divisions. The bad divisions, weirdly enough, have gone backwards.
Yes.
Like, bad divisions are all worse, are all notably worse at grappling than they were like 5-10 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the good divisions are all good. And unfortunately, under this criteria, it means that welterweight is pretty much a bad division now. I mean, it's borderline, but
it needs Chimaev back.
Mm.
Yeah. It needs Chimaev back badly.
Welterweight, middleweight, light heavyweight, and heavyweight are all pretty much undeniably just all really grappler, just lacking in grapplers compared to they used to be.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like an accident that Chimaev was just embarrassing every single welterweight he faced.
And middleweight.
Go on, Ben.
He's also fought. He fought Mearshad at middleweight, knocked him out.
Right.
And he also fought a former middleweight in Kevin Holland. So, the thing about the modern grappling system is, the best way I could describe it is the difference between a really good grappler and a really good, scrambler or something like that, that's more like MMA oriented, MMA grappler, is that even when they're facing someone who they're better than, or they have the opportunity to kind of like skip over using a specific step, for example, windshield wipering your foot to make sure that you're covering your exit, essentially.
Explain that things, for the 4-year-olds
sure.
among us.
So essentially, let's say I'm passing and I'm going for a knee cut and I'm having a bit of a hard time like freeing the leg fully.
Mm-hmm.
I can try and just kick the knee and try and just like yank it out as hard as I can, without really worrying too much about whether my exit is covered, or I can kind of like put my weight back, put my instep in the leg, open it up while also keeping my weight really, really tight and heavy on top of their hips and their upper leg, pinning them so they can't go anywhere. It's a longer, slower route, but I'm making sure to cover my ass.
Mm-hmm.
The way I would describe it is like if you open the door, you step through, close the door so that they can't follow you. And that's something that we see a lot more of in the grapplers that are kind of like dominating in a lot of these divisions.
Yeah.
And that style takes advantage of a lot of the mistakes that MMA fighters make because they're covering these holes. They're not going to slow down to do every step.
Right.
Guys like Peter Yan, they're really, really good at scrambling through positions. And for the most part, their positioning is excellent. Like they're getting their underhooks. They're making sure their hips are, their hips and weight distribution is good. They're creating posts and frames. But at the end of the day, like if you're trying to go through it as fast as you possibly can, you're going to have to skip some steps that forcibly slow you down. And in those moments, somebody equally fast who is that good of a grappler and who does mind their P's and Q's in a way that the MMA meta that developed prior missed, they're going to take advantage of those spots. And that's why Aljo can walk such a tightrope with a game plan like he did in that second fight.
Yeah, with a very narrow approach against an extremely good fighter and just crush him for long periods of time.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. It sounds like what you were saying before about how your experiences fighting in MMA changed your perspective on grappling. What it essentially sounds like is basically just a greater sense of urgency in a lot of positions. That you can't hang out. And that's kind of validating to hear you phrase it the way you just did, because I think this is why I've been noticing it for so long, especially among flyweights, that there is like a class. You know how like light heavyweight is a terrible division, so there's always like one or two guys who just pull guard and just keep submitting people no matter how completely dysfunctional their games should be for modern MMA?
Paul Craig.
What? Paul Craig? Whereas at flyweight, it is, in a sense, the most MMA division as far as grappling. It is the scrambliest division where people are the fastest, they weigh the least. They basically have the greatest access to like the cheat codes that MMA fighters take full advantage of. And so maybe
it's fucking awesome.
It's awesome. It's the coolest.
It is so fucking cool.
It is still top 2 divisions to watch for that reason. But it's also, it must be, and it seems like you might agree, it must be the reason why I noticed that there is a strong class, a growing class even. And this was really a hallmark of Demetrius Johnson's style for his long reign as champion, of fighters who seem exceptionally good at getting people down and fighting a very slow, controlled, positional game where they just crush these quick little dudes who want nothing more than to just endlessly scramble and never accept a position. And it works because of that, is what I keep noticing, that like, because these guys can't accept a position, when they have to, they break down. Their games stop functioning when they are no longer given a choice of whether they want to agree to be held down or not. Does that kind of align with what you're talking about?
Yeah, and the way what I would add to that is like the thing about flyweight is that when you're in a static position as a flyweight, you're very small and you're trying to push 125 pounds. But if you have the momentum and that space and that speed and you can just keep going, you're generating enough force that you can kind of break the holes.
Right.
So yeah, when what changes these heavy top game grapplers compared to a lot of other MMA fighters who are grappling is that they kind of understand how weight distribution works. So if you notice that someone like, I'm going to always go back to like somebody like Alja or somebody like Oliveira, when they take your back, they're kind of draped over you. Mm. If you think about the way they position themselves, they're expanding they're trying to cover as much of your body with their body as possible. Mm-hmm. When you can do that to someone, it is so exhausting and difficult to carry, and it's so hard to move them because you don't have any space. So you have to now explode into them to create the space, and then you still have to maneuver through that space, all while pushing through their weight and gravity helping them push you down. So that's the kind of stuff that makes these fighters like Askar Askarov successful when they're engaging in the game. They're putting all of their weight onto whatever they happen to be holding. So if I'm on top of a leg and I'm not so high on it that I can't actually like run the pipe, I will pull as whatever I have that I'm holding to my chest, and I'll put all my weight on top of you. Mm-hmm. Even if you can stay standing, that's so hard to like just balance yourself through, because now you're carrying, I weigh like 195. Like you're carrying 195 pounds on your lower leg, and it's not easy to do that. Mm-hmm. So that's what you'll always see from a lot of fighters who are really, really good. I'll use Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Neil Magny as a perfect example. There's a point where like Neil actually gets his knee is kind of like framed against Shavkat's stomach, and a lot of fighters will try and like scramble and push through it, which uses a lot of energy, even if they succeed. Shavkat is just literally is like, okay, he exhales and just lays on top of it and leans his weight towards the head of Magny. Mm. Because it's not a scramble, Magny's not able to frame and like turn his hips under, separate from his upper body. It's just a static position. And he's just leaning and slowly sliding, and then he falls off into it when Magny is forced to explode. Mm. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about, where you just get lean and put all your weight down without expending too much energy. Like that's what makes it work. Mm.
Slow.
I think because I was thinking about this like in relation to something else I saw. I was wondering, like, I guess another interesting question that maybe we can touch on a bit is like, how much has MMA, how much has MMA and how much of the trends in MMA and jiu-jitsu grappling sort of diverged, but how much of things are people have just said, these don't really work in either sport, how much have they, but that's a bit of a diversion. I think one of the things I was thinking of is like a lot of the changes seem to be around kind of maximizing, as you said, sort of maximizing points of contact and points of leverage. So one of the things I was thinking of was like Damian Maia's famous like tripod guarding. He was like, because that was essentially him using his forehead as a pin to move around. I think, and obviously like Khabib controlling limbs and so on. But I think the more notable one I was thinking of recently was the Craig Jones thing. He was just like, I think he said like black belts don't use side control, and I think one of the things he said was it's because.
What's that, Ben?
I took great offense to that. My favorite position to be in. If I have you in side control, I'm such a happy camper. So that one hurt my soul. I was like, damn it.
Side control, from my extremely limited jiu-jitsu experience, though, it's definitely harder. It takes more knowledge, I think, to actually control somebody from side control, whatever the name may be.
You got to go high up.
Yeah, but it's half guard, especially if you're like, I don't know why this would come to mind, but if you happen to be like much fatter than your rolling partner, real easy to keep someone down comparatively. Side control, unless you're doing it right, a lot of room to buck and create chaos.
Can't do that if they come. Just go perpendicular to the person's shoulders and you'll be fine.
Okay. Well,
that's where your weight should be. Shoulder line.
Yeah, but what he basically said about it is that, I mean, as far as I can remember, it's just paraphrasing, is that because you're only using your hands to control them. I mean, obviously that's not quite true, but,
makes sense.
You're losing points of contact. So I think that is what jumps out to me more is the idea of like jiu-jitsu as a like the coordinational kind of thing where you have to bring together like all the points of contact you can, whether it's your head, your shin, your like and everything, this in sort of like the more points you have in play, the more suffocating your pressure is going to be and the less options your opponent will have. I mean, admittedly, they might not panic their way into a cool submission or something, but that does seem to me like in a sort of really broad macro sense, like one of the trends that we've seen.
Yeah. So let's let's talk about some, well, where should we begin? Where should we continue? We can talk either about, name a few fighters, or we can start with, a few of the like increasingly common positions that like my tiny brain has been able to notice in MMA grappling, things that I think of when I'm trying to envision what defines the sort of toolkit of this modern style of MMA grappler.
Quad pod is what I would want to talk about first.
What the hell is that? And how dare you? We don't talk like that on this show. This is a family show, Ben. I don't know what you just said, but I didn't like it.
Listen, I understand that you're prejudiced and you're from a prior generation. But in modern times, we are comfortable talking about the quad pod, okay?
Okay.
You need to grow with the times, okay, Connor?
All right. I'll try. What the hell is a quad pod?
When fighters, they don't turtle up, but they get to they'll put their hands and their feet on the floor and they're trying to like quad pod, like they're like a quad pod where they're trying to like stand up while you're on top.
Mm-hmm.
Every good grappler just takes their back because it is such an exposed position. It is so hard to be able to block the hook. You would essentially have to go to a tripod position to bring the elbow back to block the hook coming in. And it's basically impossible. Any good grappler just takes you back instantly.
I'll tell you what, I mean, Aljamain Sterling does that. He did it a million times to Pyotr Yan. I also noticed it was not an effective maneuver at all for Damir Ismagulov against Arman Tsarukyan.
Yeah, and that one was funny because Arman's kind of short, so his legs like didn't really comfortably reach all the way around for those hooks until he completely just broke Damir in the later rounds. But in the beginning, he was like doing a lot of riding because he wasn't gonna. Arman is such a good grappler. Holy shit!
Obviously,
he's so good. Like just like watching like it's so those little things where they block you with a frame, like where most fighters wouldn't. They lace the leg in it for like even a half second just to like again cover their asses when they're there. Mm-hmm. They'll put just a little bit more weight on just to make you more uncomfortable when they really don't have to. It just makes it more miserable for you. It's really their willingness to concede positions, knowing that they're gonna it's gonna be a miserable experience for that person to gain that inch, and you're just gonna take it back anyway, or work to take it back. Okay, fine. You want to get back, like you want to force me from like a side control to half guard? Fine. I'm just gonna make it a miserable experience. You're gonna have to carry all my weight for 3-4 seconds, and then okay, now I'm in half guard and I'm starting to pass immediately. It's all those little things. He's just so good.
Which is very similar to something I'm often asking for more of in striking as well. Like you don't force things. You have to be flexible. You take the openings that are given to you. If I really, really want to punch you in the face, but every time I try, you like lean back and skitter away, I should just take the leg kick, right? I should take the body shot. I should take the targets that you're not fully focused on defending. So at the very least, while you're succeeding and avoiding the thing I really want to do, you're paying for it. And you're not having a fun time, and I'm at least scoring points, I'm racking up damage, et cetera, et cetera. So what is the difference then? Because obviously the quad pod is super effective a lot of the time. Like a lot of MMA, I would even say the majority of people who face that fall off the top or don't even try to actually control the back. Like maybe they allow the opponent to get up and they stay on a rear waist cinch. That happens all the time, but it does seem to be a really effective way to shake the vast majority of MMA fighters off of back control. So what's the difference between a good grappler taking advantage of that position, and maybe we can get an example of somebody who, again, I mean, Sarukian just, I think, defeated that position again and again against Ismagulov, but if there are any other examples come to mind that can illustrate the way an expert handles it.
So, I mean, the thing that I have the biggest problem with MMA fighters doing that is that if you're on bottom and you're worried about getting ground and pounded and then you give your back to a superior grappler, what do you think is going to happen? Now you've just given them an opportunity to ground and pound you where you can't see it, and they can also choke you.
True.
You're giving them more options. Now, granted, if you roll them to the back, their back, that's what I would want to see. I would rather see what MMA fighters should be training is to constantly force your opponent to have to reestablish those hooks. And most MMA fighters don't seem to know how to fight the hooks using their lower half. They always try to fight them by quad potting and fighting the hooks being put in the first place. Mm-hmm. If you're on your back, if someone has your back and you're on the mat, you got to keep your hips centered towards the ceiling and start to pull your weight over the inner thigh of whoever you're going against. It doesn't matter either way.
You try to get your butt outside the hip of the person on your back, right?
Exactly.
Onto the ground.
It's going to start to feel your leg. Your shoulders are going to drive back towards behind you, and you keep your back flat to the mat, and you're able to then fight as they try to come back on top. And then you can scramble, which is what MMA fighters are good at. You're good at scrambling anyway. So get your shoulders to the mat, get your hips to the mat, point it towards the ceiling, and make sure that you frame with your hands so they can't come on top and scramble. Instead, these fighters just want to stand up as quickly as possible. They don't want to be on the ground at all. That's what we've been training them. So if you want to stand up safely, you have to just essentially make sure that you aren't creating enough space for the hooks to be put on. Get to the cage and start to slowly, one knee at a time. Your knee and your elbow can block together. You can keep tucked. Chin is tucked, so you can't really give up the choke. If the person starts to separate to really land ground and pound, that's the time to move. Get up.
Yeah, you're right.
Get up once they separate to ground and pound. If they're going to try and stay as close to you as possible, then you cannot give them any space. That's the difference. You have to understand what they're essentially trying to do. If you feel them start to separate to land good ground and pound, that's when you get up. At least that would be my thought process on it. If they're sticking to you like glue and they're trying to take your back with the hooks, then that's what you need to defend against.
Yeah. But again, to be fair to MMA fighters, MMA is full of shortcuts. And this is a process I have to go through again and again with striking. Like being a fan of boxing and kickboxing and all of these more refined, more specialized striking arts, you see a lot of terrible versions of both in MMA. But the reason is the reasons are many, I think. But one of the major ones is that there's so much to cover. Shortcuts are invaluable for most fighters who just simply cannot become an expert at everything. It's impossible. So
I have a solution to that sort of. Or at least I think it would be a solution.
You're about to become the best MMA grappling coach in New York, so lay it on us.
The reason why every MMA gym has boxing class, every MMA gym has kickboxing class, jiu-jitsu class, something like that.
Yeah.
That's generally the structure. And then you have MMA class or whatever it is. Even bigger gym, that's kind of like the structure.
Right.
The problem is that let's say you're doing boxing. Okay, so all your sparring partners are all MMA fighters that train at your gym and already know you and already train with you. You're just boxing MMA. You're boxing an MMA fighter. I think that the problem is that it would be really expensive to do this, and most fighters just would not be able to afford it. You can't just go to gyms all over the place. You can't go to a really good jiu-jitsu gym and a really good boxing gym and a really good. The ideal situation would be that if you're going to work on your boxing, you need to go to a boxing gym and box with people in that context so you can understand the things you're doing wrong, and gain that experience and knowledge, and then you could apply it in an MMA context much more efficiently, I think.
I fully agree with that.
There's the extremes of that which can end up not being good, whatever the fuck Conor McGregor was doing for his boxing match, I guess. Could be an example of that. But Benson Henderson was virtually unsubmittable. Why? Well, that guy spent a lot of time doing jiu-jitsu at a really high level. IBJJF tournaments, I think he took bronze in a major tournament once at his weight class in the gi or something like that. That's really going to help you in MMA because you understand how to apply it in an MMA context because you're an MMA fighter. That's the whole purpose of why you're doing it. But it'll give you that other perspective and allow you to tighten up things. how are you going to tighten up the mistakes you're making that a boxer would be able to exploit, a good boxer would be able to exploit, if you're just boxing with your MMA sparring partners? That's the thing that I would say would fix a lot of the issues we see.
Yeah, that I intrinsically agree with. And I'm definitely saying that about MMA boxing all the time. You're learning from people who the shortcuts keep working because you're training and learning with people who don't know how not to let the shortcuts work. You're going to say, Phil?
Yeah, I was going to say, like, on the specifics of the quad pod, why does, like, I was thinking of is the person that was this the most, is this Derek Lewis?
No.
Derek Lewis more of a bench press expert.
One, there's really no good grapplers at heavyweight. Or at least no good back takers at heavyweight.
DC was actually okay, which is why
he
immediately went.
It was a joke. Like, he absolutely destroyed him from back control. So like the one example, the best version of it was just like absolutely owned him.
I was thinking like it can be a cool thing because you can look at it to see, what are the really dumb reasons why this doesn't work? Like, or why are people like? Is it because people are scared to put their hooks in? They put their hooks in like when people are getting up, like the wrong order. Yeah. Do they attack the choke too quickly?
Is it better upper body
when
grips?
They're on the back? Like,
they're not
what are the like classic mistakes people make?
So the back is really a grappler's position, right? Like, you do need to have decent understanding of how to maintain control of somebody from their back while also being able to dish out damage. That's why, like, you'll sometimes see it's really hard if both guys are really, really good grapplers, even when one has a superior, like Formiga, right? There were times where he would take the back of somebody, or Damian Maia would take the back of, well, Damian's actually not the greatest example because he just doesn't want to hit people. But, except for Gunnar Nelson, apparently. Mm-hmm. One guy, he's like, I'm going to fucking kill you.
Yeah.
The rest of his career, no.
Speaking of, when you were talking about the opponent on your back, like creating enough space to strike you, and that's when you scramble, I was thinking of how completely impossible it seemed for Gunnar Nelson to do that when Damian Maia was like, I'm going to lean completely away from you while both hooks are in and just hammer fist you in the side of the head 100 times.
Phenomenal. God, what a glorious performance.
But even most great jiu-jitsu players in MMA can't do that, right? Like the incredible
right. No, I mean, it is Damian
control.
Yeah, that was crazy. But it's one of those. It's the thing that makes it, and it's a grappler's position, right? So most MMA fighters are not necessarily going to gravitate towards it in the same way they would gravitate towards just having a really good riding game and just being able to slam punches into you, right? Because you're doing a lot of damage, or not even being good at it, but just doing it anyway, like Dricus Duplessis. Because when you're doing it to Darren Till, anything is possible. So you have to dedicate a lot of time to being really good at it, and it's not just being on the back. You have to dedicate a lot of time towards being really good at taking the back. So it's because there's so much effort that would need to go towards it. You're basically devoting too much of your skill point power ups towards one tree and not spreading it enough. That's why I think it's rarer in MMA. And that's why someone like Aljo is such a rare and interesting fighter, right? Because it is so hard to make that style work, and he's done it.
Then the advantage of that is that obviously you get people who are completely unoptimized to be able to deal with that as part of the skill set. They're like, oh my god, in this area, and I suddenly have no idea how to escape.
Look at Corey Sandhagen, right? Like, the guy's a really good grappler. He's a really good defensive grappler. Like, just completely shut down by Sterling. Just unbelievable.
How important are like the upper body grips for those quick back takes in that quad pod position? Because that, to my novice's eyes, that often seems to stand out. Is that MMA fighters, they get their hooks in, and then because there's this awkward angle, like they just can't stop themselves from sliding up the opponent's back. It seems like, do we need better double underhooks? Like, what are the little positional niceties that make it possible to just stick to somebody like glue in a way that a guy like Arman Sarukian or Aljamain Sterling can, even when he's in this position that 90% of MMA fighters just get quickly shaken off out of.
So a couple of things and factors that we need to just point out. Like obviously, this pertains less to the first round, but they are sweaty. It's very slippery.
Sure.
That is a real factor. Like I won't deny it. When you go on these jiu-jitsu mats and it gets super wet and like just full of sweat all over the mats, yeah, it's hard to maintain control a lot of the time too. So there's that factor. Number 2 is the gloves. The gloves do change things when it comes to grip fighting and hand fighting for the choke and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
It is not as easy, especially when sometimes they can sneak a finger in your glove and pull, and it's very frustrating. That being said, the minutia of it, like a lot of the time, like you said, they get the hooks in, but they don't really know how to both maintain the position, and fight for the choke and also land some ground pound, or land some ground and pound. Having that pressure in your hip is really important, being able to really get your weight behind your hips. You want to stay lower.
Yeah.
You don't want to get high, right? So if you start to feel yourself slip down, the most important thing is to dig as deep with the underhook as possible so then you can pull yourself back up. Switch to a double underhook grip if you need to pull yourself back, and then work to reestablish a seatbelt. Another thing that really, really good grapplers will do, is that because again, they understand the urgency and they understand how to put their weight into something. When you just squeeze really hard, it's a really hard thing to move someone. When they have their weight on top of you and they can squeeze themselves into you, now there's all that pressure, but it's much harder. Like you can save yourself from falling off the back by just yanking really hard on something. And you'll kind of just see that. It's not so much as like forcing a faster scramble, but just more like just pulling on something really hard.
Something I underestimated before I ever did jiu-jitsu was how much it just sucks, just as an experience. Like, I remember, friend of the show, former BE writer Tom Grant. Once I was like showing him a little, like how to roll and come back with a left hook, like what the positional details are. And then he was like, look at this Kimura. And he just put the grip on my arm and it hurt. He didn't crank it, just the tightness. Like the blade of his forearm, just like crushing into the muscles of my arm. It's horribly uncomfortable to face a superior grappler. So maybe that's an element of just squeeze the shit out of them in whatever position you're in, crush them with bodily pressure, and that will make a difference. I also noticed a lot of the best guys seem to, and maybe this is what you're talking about with like getting the hips back, find a way to kind of sag off, to sag to one side, to dig in deeper with one hook, so that they can, when the posture of the opponent prevents you from, just sort of sitting back with your hips, their butts too high in the air, you got to find another way to kind of lower your center of gravity, I guess. So a lot of these guys will just lace one hook in really deeply and kind of get off to the side just so that they can find some angle to pull their weight back that the opponent's posture can't undermine.
Yeah, I mean, I think Arman did that a lot against Demir, actually. And it's something I do actually a lot also because it's pretty straightforward. It's like these positions, the turtle, and when they're trying to like balance and stand up and all that, they need their weight centered in order to be able to push off the ground, right? They need to stand up straight. So when you put all of your weight off to the side and you're yanking them to the side, it's almost impossible for them to stay balanced. So they're going to fall over, which gives you those opportunities to get those hooks back in. And when you do it, when you already have a hook and you can kind of like lock that in even tighter as you pull off to the side, it's so much worse. But, the best grapplers that you'll see are people who are just going to they'll just pull their weight off to the side a little bit to get you to move, and then they can take the back off of that, land some strikes, whatever they're going to be doing. You could do that in basically any position where you have, where they're trying to stay centered. You can just off balance them by holding on really tight and just leaning with your weight off to the side. And you don't create any sort of openings for them to sneak an arm in, sneak a leg in.
Okay. So let's, we've been pretending for some time that jiu-jitsu is not fake, which is, we've already addressed that it is. So what about the shortcut that isn't a shortcut? Because there are a lot of these modern guys, who will definitely take the back, but usually after their opponent has been ground into a paste. And up to that point, instead of taking the back, instead of this like sort of sharp counter to those quad pod kind of positions and the wild scrambles that most MMA fighters depend on, they will ride and break the opponent down with a more of a wrestling style approach. You mentioned DC, a true specialist who just punched obvious holes in Derek Lewis's very basic shortcut filled game. Guy wasn't putting his hooks in, he was controlling a wrist, lacing up a leg, chopping away at the forearm when Lewis tried to build up a base. Is that an equally viable approach if you're not as comfortable, hopping on a guy's back and finding the correct angle to drag your hips down and fighting for double underhooks, et cetera, et cetera? Like, are there any advantages to just sort of staying kind of off to the side, keeping your weight over the opponent, but also sort of keeping your knees or feet on the ground so that you can adjust if they do manage to force a scramble?
Well, there's a significant benefit to it because it's MMA. Most fighters don't want to be on their backs. So they're not willingly going to be able to utilize guards that could. The thing about being in the back and stuff like that, and like a lot of positions in jiu-jitsu, is that you have to fight against someone who's trying to utilize their bottom game to get on top or to submit you. Where in MMA, they just want to get up, right? So they're not necessarily going to be willing to fall to their back and start again from side control or half guard or fight from there where they can get punched. So the game works really well because of that. They're trying to stand up. It's kind of like, it's an answer to the question of like, okay, nobody wants to stay on their backs. They want to stand up. What's my answer to that? They're not looking to play guard with me. So why am I going to focus on really, really strong control from half guard or side control when I'm going to be spending maybe 5% of my time grappling there?
Yeah.
So it's kind of just like, you're making these decisions based on what you're responding to. So for DC, like, he's not really going to be facing many guard players at heavyweight.
Right.
So, and again, in flyweight, same thing. Like, the reason why the grappling is what it is, and why Askar Askarov is such a good counter to that, is because of what everyone's response to each other was. So, yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about, if we're on the wrestling ride approach side of things, and obviously a lot of these guys, they are able to blend wrestling and grappling approaches to, say, an opponent posting up on all fours, or turtling together seamlessly. And maybe they grind the opponent down with rides before they, then, sink the hooks in and take the back on a substantially weakened opponent. Or they go more like Aljamain Sterling does for the I guess you could say more narrow, more specialized jiu-jitsu kind of approach. One of the moves that every casual, such as myself, knows, and I'm going to use a name that I don't know, but I suspect you probably hate, much in the same way that Ryan Wagner hates the term Muay Thai plum or Muay Thai clinch even. He's like, it's a double collar tie. That's what you're talking about. The Dagestani handcuff, Ben, which is a term I quite like because it's got a flavor to it.
I love I love that term.
As a writer, it's very poetic, right? It sounds cool.
It's not just cool. It's like, yeah, like, who cares? Like, they're the most popular, famous people to use it. Of course they're going to name it after that.
But that is obviously such a huge thing in MMA that you basically didn't see.
Imagine if someone called, like, grappling positions stupid things. That could never happen.
Someone called a position crackhead control.
Well, the funny thing is,
crazy.
This is something I like about wrestling. It is a completely sophisticated full martial art, but it's also such a meathead exercise that, like, when like Daniel Cormier sees that position, he's like, oh yeah, it's a cross wrist. They have such boring, straightforward names for everything. Judo has a million names for each tiny permutation of a given throw, sweep, reap, trip, whatever. Wrestling, like, oh, it's a foot sweep.
I just want to know which Dagestani world champion that Brock Lesnar was training with.
Oh,
the Dagestani handcuff.
Right, he did that. He also had that badass gift wrap kind of thing on.
Oh, that was so fucking.
Yeah,
hard.
A lot of these. Yeah, gripping with one.
Was it?
I think so.
Yeah. Just beat the shit out of him.
Yeah.
Holy crap.
Instead of gift wrapping the arm around the back of the head, he hooked around the head and grabbed under the armpit and then just mashed Frank Mir. He turned his face into strawberry jam. So yeah, what's with the Dagestani handcuff? If we agree on the name, I mean, is it true? We didn't used to see that technique at all earlier in MMA, did we?
I think that you would probably see like a lot of things. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I'm going to let Phil, because he probably does remember more, but I feel like a lot of things.
Don't look at me.
Well, now he has to think of one fast. Like things like just posting on somebody before you throw ground and pound.
Sure.
Or arcing your shots around things. Like that was something like Anderson Silva did really, really well.
Yes. But
nobody else like really paid attention because he was so flashy with his striking. Like his ground striking was by far 100% better than his striking on the feet. It's not even close.
100%.
There's a video that Miguel and I are putting like for the Instagram. It's just the pointing it out. Like go watch his fight with Yushin Okami after dropping him.
Yeah.
Like to get the finish. Just fantastic.
There's a million of them.
It's amazing.
Okami, the Marquardt finish. There's 100 of them. Yeah.
The point being that there's probably somebody who did the Dagestani handcuff. I just can't think of it.
Well, I mean, you pointed out Brock Lesnar used, I'm sure, and he almost certainly thought of it as a cross wrist, the same term that DC used. But obviously, it's a wrist ride. It's a wrestling move that has existed for a long time. But I think people are.
If you think about it just really quickly, like why hasn't it been so prevalent and stuff like that? Like because most fighters aren't really that good at ground and pound. They're not really that.
Which is crazy, right? It is MMA. Ground and pound
doesn't make any sense.
Is MMA.
It's the one thing that changes grappling.
Yes.
Completely. And you don't even bother to get very good at it. Like you're not like targeting your ground and pound in any meaningful way. You're just hitting the gloves, hoping that you get a stoppage. You're not mixing in body shots in any like clever, creative ways. Like it doesn't make any sense. Like if you're trying to pass and you're opening up the elbow and you are going to have to really fight for it to try and control it, just take the opportunity to land a really hard knee to the liver. Like if you're on that side.
Yeah. Why hasn't ground and pound become more sophisticated? Of all the things that MMA should be specifically revolutionizing, clearly it's ground and pound, right? I don't know.
Yeah. Like why is Tito Ortiz's game like still viable? As a top control game.
Yeah.
Like it would be perfectly, like he would dominate light heavyweight now.
It's still my go-to reference. So just when I see somebody getting in someone's guard and just hitting them in the body and then the head or working elbows from guard, I'm like, oh, Tito Ortiz style.
Yep.
It still happens all the time.
So ridiculous, but
yeah.
I mean, I think it's just, to Ben's point earlier, it's just the amount of points people are putting into stuff. They get to that point and they're like, well, by the time I'm hitting him in the face, I'm probably winning, right? So I'll just put 0 points into this.
Sure.
Like 1.
I suppose so.
And then, yeah.
I don't even think that fighters really need to like put all the skill points in grappling and stuff like that. I think that you can get to a certain point. Like if you're a really good athlete and you're a really good camp, you're going to get good jiu-jitsu instructor. You're going to learn the basics. And I don't think you need to learn the things that make you phenomenal, like Aljo, or Oliveira, or people like that, or Islam. That kind of stuff, like you can learn somewhat later on in some fashion, because you need to first learn, how do I scramble out of these positions? How do I control somebody from half guard? Stuff like that.
Sure.
But after a certain point, you need to take your ass and go to a fucking really high level jiu-jitsu gym, and you need to put in like at least a solid year of work there.
Right.
Where you can like start to like find those spots where you're getting caught against really, really good jiu-jitsu guys who can match you athletically. And that's how you're going to learn how to like, okay, so in MMA, I'm not going to face that, but I'm going to tighten these things up and I'm going to take these things and I can apply it in MMA. I think that would really be interesting. I want to see fighters do more of that.
Basically, at the point at which you start to think to yourself, boy, I've stopped improving. Maybe I should change weight classes. That's when you need to get to a boxing gym or a jiu-jitsu gym with some extremely high level experts and learn the real subtleties and the true fundamentals of those art forms.
Yep. It's not always, by the way, it's not always a change in gym that's needed. Sometimes you just need to add and supplement, right? Like, that's why I really think a lot of camp switches aren't necessary. They're just more like, you just need to like go to a specific gym for this specific thing and just train there.
Hire a gunslinger, you know, just hire a Ronin who can teach you these, get an extra mentor. I mean, I've worked with, Kieran Fitzgibbons, scouting for him, who does, I think it's, CSA, Combat Sports Academy in Southern California. And the shift in striking from guys like Josh Emmett and Andre Feely when they started to work with him was very, very noticeable. These are alpha male guys who just sought another gym literally in the neighborhood with somebody who's just a better striking coach than, for example, Justin Buckles. And it made a massive difference.
Justin, sorry. It's not a name you really hear very often. So it's just.
No, he's sort of quickly become irrelevant, hasn't he? But
no, it's just, I was just like, what?
Who?
No, that's the striking coach until that's.
Well, he's also famously a podcaster. I think that's how he got canceled. I don't really remember how.
Oh, I didn't even know that part. Well, all right.
He disgraced himself, I believe, on like the Alpha Male podcast.
Oh, delightful. Well, it's a real step down from Dwayne Ludwig in terms of striking.
Ludwig was another obvious example at that gym, at a very generalist gym, especially as far as striking is concerned, where, the level of sophistication just skyrocketed when they brought in a guy like that. But, I mean, this is the approach that like old school boxers used to take. They, even in something as specific as boxing, when Bob Fitzsimmons wanted to work on his infighting, he brought wrestlers into his training camp. He wasn't wrestling. He wasn't doing MMA. He didn't need to understand the full scope of what it was that wrestlers could do. He just needed to learn some subtleties from people who were really good at this very specific slice of stand-up fighting, controlling somebody in the clinch, tying them up, and then use his own intuition to figure out how that connected to striking, to boxing. But it really does shock me, the sort of lack of science in ground and pound in particular. And it's changing. Just as I think like boxing in general. I don't know if you feel this way about jiu-jitsu in general, but boxing in general is definitely improving. We are seeing, like, in my opinion, Alexander Volkanovski, he's basically with pretty standard fundamentals better than almost any boxer we've seen in MMA. Ever. So he's incredibly good. And, it's clear the guy has just put in a ton of work on his footwork, his jab, his combinations, his counters, all of these really very basic boxing ideas. But the ground and pound thing is so strange because it's mixed martial arts. And I think that's one area especially where to have a kind of system, you don't necessarily need to be incredibly deep in your wrestling or your grappling to figure out the points at which it intersects, where the different phases intersect with each other. Like the Dagestani handcuff, the cross wrist. A big part, I think, of why that has become so prevalent now is it's a tremendously effective position to hold someone against a wall and punch them with your free hand. Like, it really, really works with ground and pound in a way that, maybe back when wrestling was like the art that actual warriors used to pin their opponent before stabbing them in the neck. Maybe they thought of these positions, in those terms, where they're like, I need to control this guy as much as I can with my body weight and one arm so I can get my dagger out. But in MMA, it's only just now reaching that level of understanding where it's like, oh, this particular wrestling move is really, really good because it allows me to work my strikes while wrestling. And Anderson Silva's ground and pound posting, one thing that I really like about Anderson's ground and pound is there's a thing boxers do I always call sticky hands or sticky punches. I've used Floyd Mayweather as an example of this. He's really good at it, but so is Andre Ward. Where when fighters will throw a punch out there and either the opponent will slip, they'll move their head some way, or it'll connect. And just when they feel that connection, they will make a small adjustment to keep the hand that is already extended in contact with the opponent's head and control them. You know, like if they've slipped, okay, I'm breaking your posture while I pivot and maybe lining up another punch because I'm in contact with you the whole time while my feet are moving. I know exactly where to aim the follow-up. Anderson Silva did that with ground and pound, where he would punch you in the face and then just sort of leave his hand resting on your face as a post and use it to base back up for the next punch. So if you notice, when he punches people in those postured up positions, the punches last a weirdly long time. He doesn't pull them back the way you would in boxing. That back to a guard. Each punch becomes a post, which sets up the next punch. But it's shocking how that these little things took what is essentially a really low percentage game for Anderson on the feet and basically everywhere else and turned him into the most violent finisher we've ever seen. Because one mistake on the feet and this ground and pound is going to absolutely destroy you. That's why he has like an almost 1-to-1 ratio of knockdowns to knockouts. Because, once he starts hitting you on the ground, there's no escape. But just most MMA fighters don't do this. They just go nuts. They get somebody down and they just start flapping around with both arms. I think Phil's right. Yeah. That it's, you're winning already, so why invest so much time in getting good at that? But also, come on, you're a professional. Invest.
It's also, I think, like a few other things that might be contributing to it are like gym structure. Basically who is in charge of teaching ground and pound. I think, back in the day, this is probably still present to an extent because people are very long tenured in positions when they're teaching things. I think, back in the day, the thing was that you'd be in an MMA gym and the, kickboxing guy did the kickboxing and the BJJ guy did the grappling and the wrestling coach did the wrestling and so on and so forth. And that is probably true to a lot of extent, to a big extent now. It's probably changing a bit in that you're getting like, MMA natives and so on, now shifting into like senior management, senior coaching positions where they can like put forward those kind of changes. But it's also just that like, I think people will just teach things because that's the way it's been taught.
Sure.
So, like organizational, what's the right word?
Inertia?
Stasis and inertia is just, it's just a big thing. Like, is the people just like, oh yeah, that's how we teach MMA here and that's how we do it. And they, there aren't necessarily going to be that much, like teaching of things which blend the two.
That happens everywhere.
Yeah,
too.
I think mainly
boxing gyms.
Yeah. I think mainly it's just going to be like, the other one thing I was going to mention is that, it's probably a little harder to teach effective ground and pound.
It is.
Than it, safely.
So the way you would have to do it is just like you'd have to just recognize the positions where you're in a position to land ground and pound. But like the thing you can practice really well is when you're grappling, making sure that you focus on, like one of the things that you were talking about with sticky hands, Connor, where like you can practice sticky hands. And I do sticky hands. Whenever you're like, let's say you're knee cutting, right? Like instead of trying to go for the underhook immediately, especially in Nogi, this works really well, grab the wrist and just push it into their face or push it to their chest really, really hard because they need the underhook too. And once you have that position, you're putting a lot of weight and force into that. So that's a way you could practice that kind of sticky hand. And then when you're striking as well, when you have the MMA gloves on, you can you can mimic the ground and pound. Yeah. Right? Like, as long as you're aware and, like, train the position itself, the ground and pound's pretty obviously there. You do have to practice it as much as you can. It's difficult. Like, you have to have, like, Muay Thai pads or something like that. And you have to make sure that you're not actually directly in front of your face in any meaningful way. But then, it's hard, but there are ways to do it. You can get creative with it.
Mm-hmm. And, people work their ground and pound on grappling dummies and stuff, but also I'm thinking you could drill the sort of routine sequences that get you, and then, you do this in boxing drills. You throw a couple light punches just to set it in your mind. This is the position where I unleash.
Yeah.
And then you reset and you go through the sequence again. Okay. So just a final, thing, cause I know we're over the time that you allotted for us. And I want to say again, we really appreciate you being here. This was fascinating. I feel I almost understand grappling better than I did before.
Appreciate you guys having me.
So just final thoughts, since you are moving into a once a week coaching role, and getting your feet wet, it's your first experience doing that, right?
Pretty much, like in a real sense, yes. I'm currently teaching an MMA class for like, Orthodox Jewish teenagers and stuff like
nice.
that, like the anti-Semitism, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an interesting experience. But, this is my first like coaching in any meaningful sense, or teaching fighters.
Mm-hmm. So do you have any, without being too full of yourself, do you have any like sort of novel approaches that you informed by your MMA experience, informed by your obviously very deep understanding of MMA specific grappling? Any thoughts on how you might, teach a jiu-jitsu class differently from the way that you were taught to better prepare people for, getting punched in the face?
Yeah. So, I'll try to summarize it. It's kind of So
broad
what
question.
I would do is kind of focus. Yeah, it's broad. It's, I'll try and summarize it, but it's really essentially going to boil down to like, I'm an added jiu-jitsu class, so they're all to this curriculum, right? So they're already getting the instruction in terms of being taught moves,
mm-hmm.
and, how to, here's how you do side control. Here's how you, that's already being worked on. So I have to give them something other than just another day of doing that. So what I'm really going to focus on is just showing people how to get, how to center your weight over somebody and make it really, really miserable to have you on top. The posts, the frames, the sticky hands, like the kind of stuff that like you wouldn't really learn until a little bit later unless you're taught it. The stuff that you figure out by just doing a lot of grappling. Eventually
it'd be like a catch wrestling style, JJ coach.
Sure.
They do like to emphasize,
to be cool, so.
they do like to emphasize the painfulness of just being pinned.
Well, I'm gonna like lighten the load because I'm not gonna try and hurt them, obviously, but they do have fights coming up. But, I'm gonna focus a lot on that. And I think that that's also really, really good for like, as long as you have the time to do that and just learn moves too. Like, and you combine that, I think you kind of like skip a lot of steps of just like that is like required mat time. It's not a good approach if you're teaching from scratch because you first just need to teach the moves. Mm-hmm. But I think like after certain points, like what I was talking about with like earlier with like going to different camps. No, just after a certain point, go to different arts and work in those arts. Same thing. This only really works if you like have a basis for grappling already.
Sure.
So.
Like, so how are you feeling about the teaching? Are you thinking like you're going to do more after this? Are you thinking, are you just going to see what it's like, or,
I'm nervous. Like I know that I already know all the guys. They were my teammates, like while I was training. So it's kind of weird that I'll be in a coaching position for them, but, I'm just going to do as much as I can to like help them improve. Like that's my only thought right now. I would love for this to be something that I can like just keep doing more of, but I also have a full-time job, wife and kids, and my own training. So it's going to be rough to do more than just once a week right now, but we'll see. Hopefully in the future it becomes something more interesting.
I don't think I'll be shocking anyone who just listened to this episode when I say, I think you'll be good at it. So I look forward to hearing some updates from how that new journey is going. Ladies and gentlemen,
thank you.
Ben Kohn, find him on Twitter, BJJ Oversimplified. Make sure you check out the, apparently soon to be 3-part interview that he did with Julie Kedzie on training culture and coach fighter relationships in all their forms. Should be very interesting. You know that we've already shared some thoughts on this show in the past about the sort of weird prevalence of romantic entanglements between female fighters and trainers, in the past. And, Kedzie is, just a great experienced, and very candid voice on all topics. So I'm sure that's great. Anything else people should check out before we let you go, Ben?
I mean, if you like beef jerky, you can buy from Ben's Beef Jerky.
Oh, yeah. Definitely buy some beef jerky, which, by the way, I'm pretty sure I was promised some beef jerky for promoting.
You never gave me your address. I've asked you 40 times.
Oh, this is so good. I was wondering. Like,
Ben, if I give you my address.
I wonder why Connor never got his beef jerky, and then I just... This is the most predictable outcome I could have imagined.
I have the screen. Listen, the tweets are there, the DMs are there. I can just, you can't even deny it either.
I'm sure there's many of them. Oh, you're making me cough again.
Hey, bro, what's your address? I want to send you some jerky. Silence.
If I give you my address, what am I supposed to bitch about? Okay, that's my question.
Very true. It is very funny.
All right, Ben Kohn.
Give me Phil's address.
Yeah, let's read
it. I wouldn't make you ship things transatlantic.
I would happily send you jerky. Don't worry about it.
Phil is a jerky. How about that?
Hey.
He's a big jerky. Ladies and gentlemen.
Why are you just trying to cover up your own long-standing incompetence?
Shut up, nerd. No, I'm not. Loser. Let's bully Phil. Everyone bully Phil now. Okay. Ben, thank you so much for joining us. Very enlightening, very interesting. We need to have you back. I gave you an incredibly broad topic, and you managed to be very insightful and interesting. I really think I can't imagine the listeners didn't enjoy that.
I hope so. That's all I can say. I hope they'll enjoy.
That's been amazing. Thank you so much, Ben.
Thank you, guys.
All right. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your holiday season. And thank you, man. Same goes to all you listeners out there. Make sure you come back next week. It is going to be...
Oh, I knew there was one thing I forgot.
Huh.
I'm so sorry. I feel bad for Tuman. He's a Fight Site colleague who we are working to get him to the U.S. There's a fund to help him cover the expenses, the attorney fees, and everything like that.
Right.
We'll link it in the. I'll link it in the tweet below the actual post and everything like that. But please donate if you can, and we appreciate it.
Right.
Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. Okay. Thank you very much, Ben. Thank you to everyone for listening. Find me and Phil on Twitter as well, at BoxingBush, at Evil Greg Jackson. One is me, one is Phil. You figure out which. And next week, the 2022 Handies coming at you. So make sure you come back for that. It is always a great time. Thanks. And until then, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.